The third speech will be held by Dr. Frank who will say about the overcoming obstacles to peace on the Korean Peninsula. Dr. Frank is a senior expert in Northeast Asia at the U.S. Institute of the Peace. He oversees the Institute's work on Northeast Asia and focuses on ways to strengthen diplomacy to reduce the tensions and enhances peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Dr. Frank 박수로 맞이해 주십시오.
Hi, everyone. Very good to be here. I want to thank the Catholic Institute for Northeast Asia Peace and the Catholic Korea Peace Forum for giving me an opportunity to participate and share my thoughts. I will focus my remarks on addressing the obstacles to peace on the Korean Peninsula, and then offer some recommendations for how we can overcome some of these obstacles. So I think the biggest hurdle to peace is not the lack of ideas, but it's rather a lack of political will based on fear and mistrust. Pope Francis, in his 2020 World Peace Day message, said, quote, "The world is paradoxically marked by a perverse dichotomy that tries to defend and ensure stability and peace through a false sense of security sustained by a mentality of fear and mistrust. And this poisons relationships between people and obstructs any form of dialogue." So to put it simply, the two countries, North Korea and the United States, fear and do not trust each other, and this is undermining their ability to build peace. And it's easy to understand why North Korea feels this way. It's a small, weak, insecure, impoverished country that's in direct conflict with the world's superpower. It also has the experience of being devastated by over 600,000 tons of bombs, US bombs during the Korean War, and also living under the threat of nuclear weapons after the US violated the Armistice Agreement in 1958 by deploying nuclear weapons to South Korea. And then on the other hand, in Washington, there's North Korea fatigue. And this fatigue is based on the perception that North Korea is a bad actor, it is deceitful, it doesn't keep its promises, and it isn't interested in denuclearizing. So given this situation, there's a conventional thinking among the establishment in DC, which includes the Biden administration, which is that we can't solve the North Korea problem. And because we can't solve it, the only thing we can do is manage it, right? We need to keep North Korea in a box. We need to strengthen military deterrence. We have to isolate it, and we have to increase pressure through economic sanctions. I think this approach is fine if you only want to achieve the limited goal of preventing war, which we have succeeded at for the last 70 years. But while this goal is a necessary goal, it is not a sufficient goal, right? There are other important goals. Things like improving relations, building peace with North Korea, tangibly reducing tensions, halting and reversing the arms race in the Northeast Asian region, enhancing communications and understanding of North Korea, strengthening the welfare and human rights of North Korean citizens, and then, of course, denuclearizing North Korea. And I think, if we're aiming for these broader goals, then the policy tools of diplomatic isolation and military pressure are not effective, and they're not sufficient. And we have 30 years of empirical evidence that supports this conclusion. When we isolate and pressure North Korea as we did during the first part of the Bush administration, or most of the Obama administration, or all of the Biden administration, North Korea does not respond well. In fact, pressure seems to accelerate North Korea's development of their own deterrence capabilities. When we look at the decisions by President Biden and President Yoon Suk-yeol to, and this is this year, to expand the scale and scope of exercises and resume the deployment of U.S. strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula, to me it seems identical to the decision by Presidents Obama and Park Geun-hye in 2013 to respond to North Korea's, at the time, third nuclear test and satellite launch with enhanced deterrence measures. And how did North Korea respond to these enhanced deterrence measures back then, between after 2013, right? It responded with the greatest advances in North Korea's nuclear weapons program, including 3 nuclear tests and over 90 ballistic missile tests. So I'm very pessimistic about seeing positive things from North Korea over the next few years. And then on the other hand, when we engage with North Korea, the evidence shows that North Korea tends to behave better. Not perfect, but better. During the 8 years of the agreed framework period, 1994 to 2002, North Korea conducted 1 missile test, the one that overflew Japan in 1998, and did not reprocess any plutonium. In 2011, during the negotiations for the Leap Day deal, or in 2018, in the negotiations that led up to the Singapore summit, there was no weapons testing. There is a 2017 study by Lisa Collins at the Center for Strategic and International Studies that confirms this pattern. When we engage with North Korea, it tends to behave better. So we know what works, right? The big question that we've all been grappling with is, okay, engagement is good, it works, but how do we get back to talks? In the past, it was relatively easy because North Korea always wanted to engage with the US. From 1953 to basically 2019, it's usually been North Korea that has been clamoring for talks with the US, and it was the US side that was reluctant because North Korea, to put it simply, was an insignificant issue, right? And it was only by the early 1990s when North Korea started to develop a rudimentary nuclear program that we began engaging. And when we did engage in the 1990s and in the 2000s, there was significant engagement, what I call the height of engagement with North Korea, not just at the Track 1 governmental level, but also the Track 2 non-governmental and Track 3 people-to-people levels as well. And there was even US congressional delegations going to North Korea fairly regularly during this period. But by the 2010s, with the start of the Obama administration, things reversed, and the US began to resume once again its more reluctant stance, what we now refer to as strategic patience. And between 2008 and the present, there was very minimal engagement with North Korea. You know, we engaged briefly in 2011 and 2018, 2019, but now it's the 2020s, and we're starting to see a strange situation where it is now the US that is open to engagement, you know, albeit in a very passive and tepid sort of way, but it's actually North Korea that does not want to engage, or at least it feels like it has the leverage so that it can wait and engage when it's ready or on its own terms. So let me get some water. Well, I'll wait. You know, I feel like I understand the belief that, you know, whether North Korea engages or not is largely out of our control, that it goes in these cycles, right? Cycles of provocation and engagement, and we happen to be in a provocation cycle right now. You know, Ned Price, who is the State Department spokesperson, he said as much recently. He said that, you know, right now North Korea is in a provocation cycle. But I just don't like the notion that we have to accept North Korean provocative behavior as a fait accompli, that we have to just sit here and take it, that we have to passively await a seventh nuclear test, that we have no agency to try and shape North Korea's behavior, and that our only policy tools are sanctions and isolation and military pressure. I think we have many options at our disposal that could be used to try and entice North Korea back to the table and forego additional testing. Things like an end-of-war declaration, a moratorium on the deployment of U.S. strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula, an end to the travel ban, offers of partial sanctions relief that are commensurate with North Korean denuclearization steps, humanitarian and COVID vaccine assistance, a reduction in the size and scope of joint military exercises, and all of these things conveyed in a letter from President Biden to President Kim Jong-un. None of these things materially undermine U.S. national security, and I think the U.S. is in a position to offer these things precisely because it maintains the strongest diplomatic, economic, and military position in the world, and even more so when it's combined with South Korea as a part of the alliance, right? And I'm not saying these types of concessions are cost-free or risk-free. They're not. There are risks. But there is academic literature indicating that rapprochement, an improving relation, typically starts when the stronger country makes a unilateral accommodation, which then sets off a process of reciprocation. This is what we need to be doing more of, taking diplomatic risks as long as we start with a robust foundation of security. But how do we actually overcome the political fear and mistrust and inertia to change our approach? And this is the tougher question that involves advocacy and social movements, public attitudes that's, frankly, beyond my purview and area of expertise. I do think the participants here probably have a better idea of the type of role that the Catholic Church can play. My institute, the U.S. Institute of Peace, held a public discussion a few years ago on the role of the Catholic Church in peace building. I think you can probably still find the video on our website. And during that event, Bishop Robert McElroy of San Diego talked about the 4 dimensions of Catholics in peace building. And these include 1, the institutionalized role of the Pope and the Holy See; 2, the national churches in each country; 3, the Catholic organizations that aid peace building; and then 4, how the Catholic Church speaks about peace building, like Pacem in Terris and the Pope's statements. I think each of these dimensions could be used to advocate for peace building on the Korean Peninsula. I'm reassured that the Catholic Institute of Northeast Asia Peace is working towards this, and I hope that the Catholics on the Korean Peninsula and in the region can work together with the Vatican, the Catholic community in the United States, and elsewhere to advocate for a peaceful approach to North Korea. I've also noted in a previous CNAP conference that our president, Joe Biden, is Catholic, right? So perhaps the Catholic community can appeal to his faith in Catholic social teachings. I say that sort of facetiously, but I think at this point you got to look for all angles, right? So I want to thank you again for inviting me to say a few words, and I look forward to collaborating in the future and also in this later breakout session. Thank you very much.